we ask everyone to please like, share, and subscribe. Popocatépetl's awakening in Mexico sent shivers down the spines of those who remembered its past fury. The volcano erupted with a vengeance, unleashing explosions that shattered windows in nearby towns and sent molten boulders hurtling through the air like missiles. The skies over Mexico City turned an ominous shade of black, as ash and smoke billowed into the heavens, blotting out the sun. The ground convulsed violently, toppling buildings and rupturing gas lines that ignited into infernos. The scent of sulfur and burning debris choked the air, forcing millions to flee in terror. Entire neighborhoods disappeared as lava flows consumed streets, homes, and lives indiscriminately. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, their halls echoing with the anguished cries of burn victims and those suffocating from the ash-laden air. In Guatemala, the earth itself seemed to roar as volcanic activity surged to unprecedented levels. Rivers of lava cascaded down mountainsides, consuming everything in their path. Entire villages vanished beneath molten flows, their inhabitants running and screaming as the relentless advance swallowed homes, crops, and lives. People desperate to escape tried to outrun the lava, only to be caught in its inexorable path. Children were separated from their parents in the chaos, their wails piercing the smoke-filled air. Forests ignited miles away, creating walls of fire that trapped survivors, their charred remains a grim testament to nature's wrath. Ethiopia, a land of ancient civilizations, faced horrors that seemed ripped from the pages of apocalyptic prophecy. The Ethiopian highlands, once lush and green, were scarred by glowing rivers of lava that hissed and spat, as they carved paths of destruction. Entire ecosystems were obliterated as the molten rock incinerated trees and boiled rivers. Villages were transformed into fields of ash, their inhabitants reduced to shadows as they tried to flee. Wildlife, too, met a gruesome fate, with animals stampeding blindly into lava flows or collapsing in heaps as toxic fumes overtook them. The stench of burning flesh and vegetation hung heavy in the air, a suffocating miasma that turned the highlands into a living nightmare. In Japan, a nation accustomed to seismic activity, the eruptions came with a ferocity that defied expectation. Volcanoes erupted in unison, sending fiery fountains of magma into the sky and raining molten debris on surrounding towns. Mount Fuji, though silent, loomed ominously over the chaos, its stillness a stark contrast to the pandemonium below. Entire highways buckled and cracked as earthquakes tore through the landscape, swallowing cars and leaving passengers trapped in twisted metal tombs. Cities plunged into darkness as power grids failed, and the screams of the terrified filled the void left by the absent hum of civilization. Indonesia, the world's largest island country, was brought to its knees. Volcanoes erupted across the archipelago, their fiery breath turning the skies a deep orange. Ashfall blanketed entire islands, collapsing roofs and poisoning water supplies. The ground trembled constantly, causing landslides that buried entire villages under tons of mud and rock. Evacuation centers were overwhelmed, with thousands crammed into makeshift shelters where disease spread like wildfire. The cries of the desperate and the wails of the grieving created a cacophony that mirrored the Earth's relentless fury. In the Philippines, the nightmare deepened as volcanic eruptions coincided with powerful typhoons, creating a deadly synergy of natural disasters. Floodwaters turned black with ash and debris, carrying the remains of destroyed villages out to sea. Survivors clung to rooftops, their eyes wide with fear as the ground beneath them quaked and the skies above them howled. Entire coastal towns were swept away, their inhabitants swallowed by surging waters or crushed beneath collapsing structures. Families huddled together, praying for mercy as nature's onslaught showed no sign of abating. Chile, a nation long acquainted with the wrath of nature, found itself facing an unprecedented challenge. multiple volcanoes erupted simultaneously, their combined force shaking the Andes and sending pyroclastic flows racing down slopes. Entire communities were incinerated in moments, their remains buried beneath layers of ash and rock. The ground split open without warning, swallowing roads, bridges, and entire neighborhoods. Isolated by the destruction, survivors faced starvation and exposure as they waited in vain for aid that could not reach them. Even the icy expanses of Antarctica were not spared. Dormant volcanoes beneath the ice sheet erupted, melting glaciers and sending massive torrents of water into the oceans. The rising seas engulfed coastal cities worldwide, forcing millions to flee inland. Entire islands disappeared beneath the waves, their populations lost to the depths. The cries of the dying echoed across the waters, a chilling reminder of humanity's vulnerability in the face of nature's power. It was as if the earth itself had turned against its inhabitants, unleashing a fury that defied comprehension. The boundaries between nations dissolved in the face of shared horror, but for many, unity came too late. The planet's wrath was unrelenting, a reminder of humanity's fragility in the face of nature's power. As if volcanic activity was not enough, the summer of 2049 brought with it a series of catastrophic earthquakes. Haiti, still recovering from previous disasters, was rocked by tremors that leveled buildings and infrastructure. The ground beneath Port-au-Prince trembled with a ferocity that reduced the city to rubble. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed as the earth opened wide, claiming homes, businesses, and lives. Bridges collapsed into rivers, trapping vehicles and their passengers in a chaotic web of destruction. The cries of the injured and the dying echoed through the streets, mingling with the dust-choked air as survivors clawed desperately through the wreckage for loved ones. In China, vast and populous, the destruction was unimaginable. Skyscrapers toppled like dominoes in major cities, crushing everything below. Entire villages were obliterated as landslides buried homes and families beneath tons of rock and mud. The Great Wall, a symbol of resilience and history, fractured under the strain, its ancient stones tumbling into oblivion. In the countryside, dams burst, sending torrents of water roaring through valleys and sweeping away everything in their path. Survivors clung to tree branches and rooftops, their screams drowned out by the relentless roar of the waters. Indonesia, already brought to its knees by volcanic activity, faced additional horrors as the ground heaved violently. Coastal towns were swallowed by tsunamis triggered by the quakes, leaving only debris-strewn wastelands where thriving communities once stood. People fled for higher ground, only to be met by landslides and collapsing hillsides. Entire families were buried alive, their muffled cries for help fading into silence as the earth reclaimed them. Japan, a nation always alert to seismic threats, faced its worst earthquakes in decades. Entire regions were devastated as the ground buckled and cracked, swallowing homes and infrastructure whole. The Shinkansen bullet trains, symbols of precision and efficiency, derailed catastrophically, their passengers flung into chaos. Nuclear power plants trembled on the brink of disaster, their operators racing against time to prevent catastrophic meltdowns. The night was lit by infernos as ruptured gas lines ignited, consuming entire city blocks in flames. Iran and Turkey, situated along active fault lines, saw cities reduced to rubble. In Tehran, the bustling capital, entire districts crumbled in seconds, trapping thousands beneath the wreckage. Hospitals collapsed, their patients and staff buried alive beneath mountains of concrete and steel. In Turkey, ancient structures that had withstood centuries of history were torn asunder, their ruins joining the growing landscape of despair. Survivors huddled in open fields, their faces etched with shock and terror as aftershocks continued to rattle the ground. Azerbaijan, caught off guard, was equally devastated. The capital city of Baku, with its iconic flame towers, became a scene of carnage as buildings collapsed and fires raged uncontrollably. The Caspian Sea rose ominously, its waters inundating coastal areas and sweeping away entire neighborhoods. In rural regions, roads and bridges were obliterated, isolating communities and leaving them to face the unfolding nightmare alone. The world's seismic monitoring systems were overwhelmed, their alarms blaring incessantly as one disaster after another unfolded. Scientists scrambled to understand the underlying causes of the increased activity, but their efforts were hampered by the sheer scale of the destruction. Some speculated that the Earth's tectonic plates were undergoing a massive realignment, while others believed that the planet was responding to human-induced changes in the environment. Whatever the cause, the result was a level of destruction unseen in human history. The Earth itself seemed to be in revolt, its wrath unleashed upon its inhabitants with a ferocity that defied comprehension. Entire communities were reduced to dust, their remnants scattered by the winds. Families were torn apart, their loved ones lost in the chaos. The cries of the grieving filled the air, a haunting symphony of despair that echoed across continents. It was a time of reckoning, a reminder of humanity's fragility in the face of nature's unstoppable power.